About environmental justice and climate change. To my left is Uzma Aslam Khan. Uzma is an award-winning author of 5 novels. Her latest, The Miraculous True History of Nomi Ali, was named one of the New York Times Best Historical Fictions of 2022 and won multiple awards, including the Massachusetts Book Award in 2023. If you haven't read it, I really urge you to read it. It's a beautiful novel. Her earlier works, such as Trespassing and Thinner Than Skin, have also received significant acclaim. Khan's writings, featured in numerous prestigious journals, often explore themes of refuge and the impact of racism, patriarchy, war, and colonialism on migrant and indigenous communities. To her left is, Tariq Alexander Qaisar. Tariq is an architect, environmentalist, filmmaker, and writer with 40 years of experience in architecture, specializing in designing schools and hospitals. Currently, he is actively engaged in film production and working on several books about the Indus Delta while managing his architectural practice. He has showcased his environmental films, photographs, and paintings in various exhibitions, including the Lahore Biennale. Tariq was featured in Time magazine for his efforts to preserve Karachi's island mangroves and presented his film, A Story of Survival, at COP27 in Egypt. And we're going to see a short film of Tariq's right when I'm done reading the bios. And to his left, now I have to find it, is Saba Pirzadeh. Saba is an associate professor of English at Lahore, at LUMS. Her research areas are environmental humanities and post-colonial studies, with a particular focus on literary representations of anthropocentric violence, climate crisis, petroculture, hydropolitics, and socio-ecological justice. Thank you. Tariq, were you seeing the film?
Yes.
Can everybody see? Do we need to get out of the way?
The inherent beauty of life, so often overshadowed by the act of living, water, light, nature, looked at, not seen, just existing, just being. Anthropocene, just now, no words, no music, nor images, just the scene, just Anthropocene, obscene, this end of Holocene. Photographs were shot in 2011 to 2023. Films were shot in 2019 to 2023. What will be shot in 2033? What will not be in 2053? This one is for the record. This is a love story. It is not only one of unrequited love, but also one of hope and joy. It is part of our story, about the shared and the joint existence between us and the natural world. It is a lament that speaks of the hard stamp our footfall has on this earth. It comments on the constructs and enterprises that damage so much. It is a love story, born of and embracing a desperately desired optimism. Recording, making, and writing this is difficult. Stories of decay need to be told. They need to be documented and discussed. It is necessary because all is still not lost. We are, however, constantly accelerating negative change in ecosystems that we inhabit, ignore, abuse. I find it very difficult. Stories of decay don't have happy endings. The endings are in silence and in rot. And memories do disappear. There is sadness in an intense love. The recipients of it cannot remain. Resigned, I am perhaps to remaining a receptacle, a sharer of memories, an anti-agent of premature demise, before it's my turn to leave. To leave.
I've been exploring this delta and documenting it, exploring it for 15 years, documenting it for 10, and filming it for the last 6. Anthropocene is so visible there. The end of Holocene is just, it is very painful. The campaign has been one of awareness creation and making sure that the message gets transmitted. If that axiom that if a tree falls in a forest, no one hears it, did it fall? If a forest disappears before people know that it existed, did it ever exist? I have attempted to ensure that the documentation and the presence of this forest remains in perpetuity as long as the internet or the AI decides it can be left there. So the verses are from my book, Soliloquies, and it's a book on environmental poetry, and it's a protest and a love story at the same time. So that's...
Thank you. So I think anybody who voluntarily came to this panel would be preaching to the converted already. I'm sure that you all already know that violent climate changes are happening across the globe, not just in Pakistan, but in almost every single country has been affected by the warming of our planet and the warming of our environment. The destruction of ecosystems, which is what that is, the ways in which we have abused the land and abused, not just abused, but encroached on areas of land that we should not have encroached on. I think it has become much more, I think one of the issues has been that it wasn't actually prevalent in literature, or there wasn't actually a concerted understanding of climate as it affects relationships, as it affects environments, as it affects families, as it affects cities, people's journeys across novels, narratives, that it wasn't set, that it is increasingly becoming more central to narrative concerns for fiction writers. And I think part of that has to do with the urgency of it, which some people see and others seem like the President of the United States completely blind to. One of the interesting things I think is that, and I think that the writers will discuss this, is the way in which they themselves have tried to incorporate issues of climate and issues of global warming into their narratives and into the lives of the characters that they depict. So take it away.
Okay. So thank you, Framji, and thank you for the film. I'll start by just sort of, for those of you who don't know me and know my work, just a little bit to say that I enter this conversation as a storyteller. So narrative is my medium. And a storyteller for whom fiction in particular is how I arrive at certain truths. And this has always been true for me, that nature is a primary character in all my books. Not a conscious thing, it's just, since childhood, this was always a sense that was very, very dear to me. I think the physical world has always told the emotional truth. Children are born with a sense, right? I mean, we all know this. We are all born with this sensory perception. Before we have language, before we know how to describe in words what something means to us, we feel it, and we feel it with our sight, our taste, our sound. And so sensory perception is really my way to story. More than intellectual abstract ideas, it is the sensory world that feels alive. And I think that what happens, you know, when we walk through a forest, or look at the ocean, or listen to bird song, or admire how sunlight falls in somebody's eyes, all of this is activated because of our senses. There's a quote that I love by Oscar Wilde. He says, I'm not young enough to know everything. So I think all children are born with this sense and with this knowledge, and then as we grow older, we shed it for whatever reason, pressures, expectations. We start to shed this sense. Some of us, and I include myself in this, you know, we try to hold on to it, and we turn to art as a way in which we can hold on to it. But the pressure is there to lose it and to grow up. And so we start to kind of separate from it. But, you know, going back to that, the child sense, we know that we are a part of nature. It's not a view. It's not something outside the window. It's not there. We don't other it. It's us. And that separation is non-existent. It's inside us. It's outside us. We are, you know, we are born in it, and we are it. So then the question becomes, you know, what separates us? Where do these separations come from? And I think, you know, we all talk about this now. It's capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, all systems of oppression, casteism, classism. And all of these separations are forms of violence, all of them. Air pollution is a form of violence. Noise pollution is a form of violence. So we can't really talk about how we got here and why some of us are so committed to protecting, preserving, and recording what we had and what we still could have, without first recognizing that, you know, we are still living in the fallout of colonialism, and then colonialism is still alive and well. We're seeing this. It's what the global South has been subjected to are systems that now are being perpetuated, including by the global South, right? So local leaders are doing within what was done from without, and this cycle continues. So we can talk more about that and how these cycles of harm continue, but I do want to come back to my books. What I want to read to you now is, are we reading yet, or would everybody like to speak first? Right? I'm not really sure what the format is.
No, I think read and then we'll move on to Tariq.
Is Saba next?
Yeah.
After you.
Okay.
After you're done.
Okay. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from my most recent novel called The Miraculous True History of Nomi Ali. The book is set in the Andaman Islands before and during the Second World War. Some of you, I'm sure all of us know about Kalapani, but many of us, I wasn't born knowing exactly where it was. So this has been a long project of mine. It took 27 years to write this book because I couldn't find enough. You know, the research was very hard to come by. One of the things in this book that I'm exploring is the impact of these structures on children. So the two main characters in this book are Nomi, and then there's this other character called I. And I is descended from one of the first prisoners to be sent to this prison colony by the British. And then he falls under the control of the Japanese as well during World War II. He's Burmese, and he works for the superintendent of the jail, the British superintendent called Mr. Howard. So already we have a cycle here where we have a descendant of a prisoner who's now working for the very system that oppressed his forefathers. And then Mr. Howard enlists I to do the side business for him, which is looting the nests of swiftlets. Swiftlets create, they build edible nests, and they build them in caves, very difficult to access. And the superintendent, of course, doesn't do this dangerous work himself. He gets the child I to descend into the cave and to steal these nests. So there's all kinds of cycles here. So this is from I's perspective. The island was split into sheer, narrow caves that housed the birds and could be reached from a steep, secret trail. As I started the climb, he examined the sky. It was empty of swiftlets, which would make it harder to collect the nests, but collect them he must. It was one of many tasks he did for Mr. Howard, who sold the nests to the Chinese and Malaya who boiled them in soup. I continued climbing. When he reached the top of the trail, the clouds parted and 3 sharp blades of light fell near the mouth of the cave. The sandstone beneath his feet turned pink. The sea far below glistened like a mirror. There was no breeze. The cliffs were still slick from the storm, and he could hear a gentle stream in the chasm, but he was not afraid. It was here, at the edge of the abyss, that he had found a kind of ritual. The repetition of dates of a forgotten past, a past not taught at school. He recited them as a prayer before descending into the cave, perhaps to keep from slipping through time. When his great-grandfather arrived on the island, 1858, when the jail was built, 1906, when his father lost his mind, 1910, when I was born, 1924. He looked around. The face of the island had never been more illuminated. He hurled himself into the abyss. His feet could see more intimately than his eyes, tracing an incline that could support his weight. Every ridge was a rib that had to be memorized, for not all would hold him, and he grew bigger each day. Lower now to a rock that swooped like the hip of his neighbor, Tidi. If his right foot tipped outward just so, he could rest long enough to feel with his left foot for the other hip, the one like a boy's. There, he grabbed the pigtails, the thick, curly roots of a tree that cast long shadows in his mind. The stream was closer. Birds fidgeted. The stench of guano fouled the air. He leapt, quickly from one slick rock to the next. If he paused, fear would engulf him. He could not afford to pause. It was too dark to see even his nose, and the air was cold here. The air, it was the father wind. Now his hands, they could unmap the grooves of time. Along this ledge and that, they had always guided him. The birds began to circle him now. 1 click, 2 click, high-pitched call. When disturbed, the Andamanese had warned him the swiftlets would speak the voice of demons. The walls started to swirl. He tried to focus. Once the eggs hatched, the nests were sullied. They had to be harvested today. Only the ones made by white nest swiftlets. Those of black nest swiftlets had the wrong shape and color and fetched a poor price. I could not see white from black in the cave, but it was a chance he had to take. His free hand skittered along each ledge, and a few nests tumbled without a sound down to the bottom of the world. The birds were pulling his flesh between their beaks. He kept his eyes shut. They could not take his eyes. More nests slipped away, and more demons came as he filled the sack to his neck. He was coated in blood, guano, and feathers as he began the ascent back to the cave's mouth. Exiting the cave, he tossed the sack onto a smooth tree limb and spread his still, tremulous limbs on the now mostly dry sandstone. The light had softened to a tawny glow. There was a wind that was just so, a wind with no name. It was good to breathe. But as he snaked his way down the secret trail, a few swiftlets followed him, still invoking calamity and destruction. I'll stop there.
Do you want to, Uzma? Did you want to elaborate on?
I think I'll let Saba speak, and then you can ask questions at the end, right? Yeah.
You're on.
Do you want me to just generally talk about literature environment? I think what we heard right now with Uzma's work also, and I think Tariq's work maybe will also touch upon, especially in the film, is looking at the importance of place. And Uzma talked about the sensory aspect of space. I think Tariq also touches upon in terms of thinking about place as not an abstract idea. Place as an ecosystem is very important, because what's happened in the modern age is that we've separated ourselves from nature. These built infrastructures help distance ourselves from the environment, which is why we feel it is okay to use the environment, to exploit the environment, and to mistreat the environment. And eco-criticism or environmental discourse is very concerned with looking at the ways that we need to rectify or correct the ways that we approach the environment, because that justifies the continual abuse. And that in turn generates the problems that we find ourselves in, whether it's climate destabilization, global warming, acidification, pollution. So I think we should hear from Tariq's work, and then we could continue this discussion more.
When the title of the panel was sent, and it's such a wonderful, wide subject, but it's a new subject. The early examples of it was in Byron's Darkness. That's a very powerful poem. I'd read it. That's 1816, fabulous piece of work, when the eruption of a volcano shut out the sun coming down, and how humanity reacts to it. It wasn't climate change, but it was the climate effect and the effect of humans. So the downstream result of climate catastrophe is gauged by us as humans, because we write about it, we think about it, and we are self-centered enough to not worry about the worm in the ground, but us worms on top of it. Then there were these incredible works that weren't climate-centric, but even Hemingway's work in the snows of Kilimanjaro, when he talks about the snowfield on the top of Kilimanjaro, that's become a reference point now for climate change. Okay, at that time it was like this, today it's like this. So the early references to climate change that I came across as a child was reading Asimov's work, 1954, his Foundation series. I don't know, I'm sure many of you have read it. The third book referenced Gaia when they were looking for the Earth. So they didn't use the word Gaia there, but they were looking for Earth as a reference. The fourth book, 1982, was about Gaia, this self-conscious Earth and planet. And it was fairly into the climate change work, because in the 50s the scientists had already started identifying changes in the climate that would impact humanity, which was ignored, they were sidelined. But in literature, the references were there, and I read the 84 book when I was 82 book when I was about 20 on one holiday. I found it in a shelf in my house, and it was these human beings in the Maldives who were living this life and having a debate whether they wanted to choose the self-conscious planet that determined the future of humanity. So the references to AI and the uber control of technology, but a sentient Earth. So this is in literature, and then the essay of Asimov, I forget, I think in the 60s he wrote The Last Question. That's a fabulous piece of writing, and it discusses the future of humanity into millennia, and it's a 1 hour read, but it's a seminal piece of writing from the 60s, I think. It wasn't in the 70s, about what not a self-sentient Earth, but a sentient universe is and about. It's a must read. But these are all pieces of literature that deal with the existential angst that human beings have and need to have. It's not a new genre. It's been there, and even in the second of the Foundation series in the 50s, he writes about a planet which was uninhabitable, but it could grow wheat or some food. You remember that, Christine? And there were hermetophytes who lived underground, and they were communicating. This is in the 50s, huh? They were communicating through a TV screen, and they would only get together when they had to, the odd time they had to socialize, but they procreate on their own and have these huge Iowa-sized fields where they were growing things. So it's been around. We have just not been looking at it from this way. So on this subject, I think.
Well, one of the things that I think it's important to understand is that human beings have had a very complicated relationship to nature historically. That in the medieval period, in the Renaissance, nature was something adversarial. It was something to be conquered. It was a scary place. It wasn't somewhere you wanted to be. You didn't want to be in a forest. You didn't want to be out in the middle of nowhere, because that's where you could die, essentially. And you can see this in the literature, actually. So if you just look at Shakespeare's plays, for example, when they go into the Forest of Arden, when they are out of their civilized environments, when they're not in the cities, they are in danger, and they're not only in sort of mortal danger, they're in sexual danger. I mean, they're in danger of being corrupted, and that doesn't really change until the 19th century, till the early part of till the Romantic poets begin to explore the natural world and to examine or to live symbiotically inside nature, as opposed to in some kind of contestation with nature. But at the same time, the 19th century Victorian civilizing mission, which manifests as colonialism in many ways, works against that. So, you go into these savage places and you civilize them. And how do you civilize them? Well, you trim the bushes and you trim the lawn and you create a beautiful English garden. And if it's manicured well, that's what civilization, that's nature, right? That's the good part of nature, not the scary part of nature. And I think that that civilizing mission has become more of a conquering mission, or it became a conquering mission over the course of the 19th and then the 20th century. And that's where we are now. We have attempted to conquer nature, and nature has yelled back in some ways. Not just yelled back, but erupted.
So I'd just like to add a couple of things. When we speak of literature and environmental justice, I think for a lot of writers, before we can talk about justice, we talk about an environmental ethic. And the ethic comes from that sensibility that we were talking about first, which is a sensibility that existed before the conquest of nature, before colonialism, before the othering of nature, the pushing it back. The consideration of it as something to be tamed. And I want to say that with that taming, that Western-centric taming aesthetic, there were a whole lot of people that were also then to be tamed. So racism and environmental justice go together. Patriarchy and environmental justice go together. Control of women and control of the land have always gone hand in hand, always. Similarly, control of, the differently abled, control of the poor. There are always communities, human communities, that are being pushed to the edges along with nature, because those marginalized people are considered, you know, natural in a negative way. But a lot of times, and I just want to come back to, you know, where my stories come from, I feel that the struggle is to preserve that natural environment and preserve the sensibility of those who've also been pushed to the edge, the human people who've been pushed to the edges, who have actually maintained those connections. Even if there's been an attempt to sever those connections, oftentimes it is children, indigenous communities, you know, the poor, the differently abled, women, who are holding on to that because there is just some intuition, something that is understood to be worth saving there, because they themselves have been pushed in that way. So I think we, you know, for me, when I speak of literature and story and storytelling, I'm not thinking of the center. I'm not thinking of the people who have done the damage as much, or rather I am thinking of that, of course, but I am also thinking of people who have been invisibilized by that. And those stories are worth saving, and those stories are worth telling. And I think for me, that's, I mean, I can give a couple of quick examples. For instance, there's this book that I adore by Eduardo Galeano. It's called Memory of Fire. It's a trilogy, and the first book is called Genesis. He's from Uruguay, he's passed now, and the first book starts with creation stories. It's, you know, how did the wind come here? How did the sunlight come here? How did the insects come? What are the birds? Where did, you know, who created the birds? These are lovely, lovely little stories about how the world came to be. And they're joyous, they're funny, they're told in little sonnets, very small, short pieces. And these are indigenous folk tales, right? These are the oral tales that we learn growing up, and in this particular context in South America. And then arrive the Europeans to control nature, and with that, you know, the trees start disappearing, the rivers start disappearing, the birds leave, the insects die out. And also the language disappears. Women are exploited, women are raped, women are killed and imprisoned. So all of this is going hand in hand. The control of the most vulnerable communities, as well as the control of nature. So that's one book I highly, highly recommend. Another book closer to our moment is called Animals, People by Indra Sinha. I don't know if you've read this. This is based on an actual event, which was the Bhopal, 1984 Bhopal pesticide you know, disaster, where that chemical factory exploded. As we know, the factory was owned by the United States. So again, this cycle of, you know, what is it for? It's for profit, it's for greed, and who's paying the price? Who's paying the price? It's the most vulnerable communities. In this case, it is the poor, and it is this boy called Animal, which the book is told from his perspective. Animal is called Animal because he's born with a spinal he's born with a spinal injury that causes him to walk on all fours. And he actually narrates his story to a journalist. So the whole book is first person, very direct. Animal is speaking to us, the reader, directly. It's a very crude book. His language is very funny. It's very personal and personable. It's very intimate, and it's very confrontational. So he's daring the reader to not feel sorry for him. He's saying, you know, I don't want to be pitied, but I want you to understand how we got here, right? And that's what the book really is. So when we speak of environment and literature, I think it starts with an ethic, and it starts with communities, human and non-human, that have been pushed to the edges and that are now reclaiming the right to tell the stories.
you like to comment on that? Saba?
I think just adding to the conversation, there's multiple other novels out there within the Pakistani context too, other than Uzma's work and Tariq's work, that also look at environmental issues. Mohsin Hamid's Moss Smoke gives a very good insight into the politics of class. And if you notice those sections on air conditioning and how the rich live within their bubble of, you know, these curated environments, these controlled environments, and they preserve their bodily health. But those air conditioners that they use are energy intensive. They're wasting energy. They're also emitting fumes, which are creating more thermal imbalances in the larger environment, which the masses are exposed to. So you see how the underprivileged, or those who cannot afford an AC, their lives become more precarious because of the environmental fallout of the use of, you know, air conditioning technology by the rich. So it's a very incisive insight into looking at the costs of neoliberal growth and what is the ecological fallout of that. And then we're living in, you know, these heat domes right now. I don't have to talk about, we're all dealing with cataclysmic, you know, heat rises that happen every year, and it's getting worse. And the use of air conditioning contributes to that also. So that's another way that we can think about technology, thermal imbalances, and climate destabilization also. Amitav Ghosh's Gun Island is something I would highly recommend in terms of thinking about the use of mythology and historical retelling, because he talks about this bookseller who traces this local legend about a merchant who defied this deity, and because of that he was punished. And the deity in that novel is supposed to analogize nature, and this merchant then represents the greedy side of humanity. So it becomes an analogy of how the drive for human greed, the drive for wealth acquisition, comes at the cost of the abuse of nature, but there's a backlash. And parallel to that is his documentation of the climate disasters that are unfolding on a planetary level. So I would highly recommend it. It's a very compelling read. It's a very thought-provoking read. And Osama Siddiq's Snuffing Out the Moon, I think, has some very kind of key passages in terms of also thinking about the water crisis, because the last section of the novel looks at dystopic new world order where the war is around water and water scarcity and access to resources. And that's something really important to think about, because we're living in this country where we're very highly water dependent, and we're the 5th most vulnerable country to climate change. So I think those are some of the novels that continue these conversations about justice and ethics and responsibility in a very poignant way.
So I have a question for all three of you. So in a sense, my sense is that the weather in narrative literature or in poetry has more often been used as a metaphor or a reflection of the protagonist's inner state, or a relationship that may not be working, and that the weather somehow symbolizes that in narrative. But increasingly, the weather itself has become a literal thing as opposed to a metaphoric device in the writing, in the narrative. Do you feel a tension in your writing with that, or do you feel that you're still using the weather in those ways or not using the weather in those ways?
Who's going to take that question? Do you want to take it? I mean, I personally, were you going to answer? Go for it.
You go ahead, please. Think this one through. This is
not a quiz. I mean, it's not great.
No, but please ask anything.
I've never consciously thought about it. I would say that in my book, the Miraculous True History of Nomi Ali, the British superintendent, Mr. Howard, there's a scene with him. There's another scene between him and I, the character who I read earlier, where he is talking about the Romantic poets and how they used weather to sort of, you know, it's supposed to just be a reflection of the human state of mind. And when I wrote that, I was making fun of him. I don't know if that comes through in the book, but I was being a little bit satirical, is that, you know, the weather only exists as a reflection of human emotion. But the weather exists independently of us, right? It will do what it does based on what we do to the climate. So I haven't, you know, really felt that in my work I'm using the weather as a way to make any kind of point per se. So I wouldn't say that in terms of my own work. I do know, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll let Tariq go now.
You know, in my own work, I haven't specifically addressed weather, but when I have searched for music for my films, in our traditional classical rags, there was a performance by Nasiruddin Sami Saba where I think it was a khayal, but the expression of a storm reaching the shores, and in the Qawwal's voices, the boom, boom, oh, it was incredible. The thunder, the rain was illustrated by these voices, and the stress of and the fear of catastrophe was so poignant in that. So I found that more in music. In weather, I mean the poems about storms, stuff are there. I mean, we are familiar with them. But it's so the weather itself is not something that I can come up with right now. But related topics, yes, please.
No, I'm just wondering how conscious you are of the ways in which you manipulate representations of climate.
Very much so, because you know, it's I'm going to read. May I read one piece that I've written in my book, and it's about the environment. It's not just the weather. It's about the climate. It's about the ecosystems. It's about the effect. The weather is a manifestation of the change of climate and the stress that we have put our Earth into. The changes of climate have been constant, and ice ages come, they go, the planets become warmer, they become cooler. Human beings, with our industrialization and our constructs of our mega engineering, have changed the Earth much faster than nature adjusts. And there's a reference in this book. I called it The Custodian. It's inspired by a verse from the surah, from the Quran, Surah Furqan, 25:63. The servants of the Lord of mercy are those who walk gently on this earth. Okay. And so as a custodian, will you be a custodian of this, or will you preside over its demise? What is writ as to how many years, or what is set, how long we survive? Will you not walk gently here, or will you turn from mercy? Who will protect this? Who will look after this? Is there a custodian amongst us? Is there a believer that sees this? Development by all means. Destruction without cognition. Progress by all means. Preservation. What does that really mean? And so the pain is holistic. It's not singular. It's not one. It's not elemental. It is the amalgamation of everything, and that is what nature is about. So
I think we'd open it up. We have about 10 minutes. 2 questions. Mic. Is there a mic? Do we need a mic? And then
hello. First of all, thank you so much to the panel. It was a really inspiring talk, and I think it's one of the most relevant topics for our country and the world. And I hope to see you all in the main garden next year, most probably. So we hope that this topic gets more light of the day. So my question is, obviously, as you suggested, very good authors and books, and you know, authors like Richard Powers, Amitabh Ghosh, they are making this topic very relevant around the world. and India. So how do we make the topic of environment vis-a-vis fiction, vis-a-vis connecting with stories to the Pakistani young generation? What formats do we use? What movements do we do to make this topic which is there in the headlines of our news, in the imagination of our youth? Thank you.
May I?
Okay, go. And then I'll
just very, very briefly. Use the skills you've been given. If you can write, write. If you can write prose, you write your prose. If you want to write poetry, you write poetry. If you want to paint, you paint. But use the skills you have, communicate it. If you're a doctor, you do that surgery with that gift that you have that changes the world. There's an artist, a surgical artist sitting in front of me. So you use those skills. That is how you change the world. That is how you change the perceptions, the people, how they think and how they feel. Because if they feel and they know that they can communicate that feeling, they will. And they will only be able to do it with the skills they have.
I would also say that we're talking about place and space, but we also have to see it, right? We have to see it. I think a lot of Pakistanis have not fully appreciated the beauty in Pakistan. And we don't encourage our children to see it, especially daughters. I mean, I was talking about the importance of, you know, we're all born with this sense and the importance in keeping it alive. But how do we keep it alive when we just stay inside and we're just afraid of letting, you know, the kids run free? So take them around, show them the geography of Pakistan, tell them the history of Pakistan, take them to the, you know, the beach is not just a place to throw trash in. It's a place where to sit and meditate and look at the birds and to appreciate the different kinds of birds there. It's a place to smell the salt. It's a place to smell the sewage and say, where did this come from and why is it being thrown in the water? I mean, there's just day-to-day little ethics like that I think it starts there. It starts from daily appreciation and a daily changing of our habits so that appreciating the geography and the beauty becomes a living habit. And from that living habit will come the language, whether it's prose or poetry or whether it's visual arts or whether it's music. But first the sense has to be kept alive. I'll give you a very quick example. I was thinking of this example a lot when I was you know, I had actually proposed this panel because it's a subject so I get very emotional about. When I lived in Lahore, so I'm not currently living there, but where I lived there, I lived next to an empty plot. And very quickly that empty plot became a place in which to throw trash. And then very quickly it became a place in which to burn the trash. And I am asthmatic. My asthma was very bad when I lived in Lahore. I also get eczema, which a lot of asthma and eczema go together, and my eyes would burn. It would be extremely uncomfortable. So this daily habit, you know, what are we doing with our trash? How are we disposing of it? Who are we considering disposable? So what used to happen was that I noticed that an ayah was dropping that plastic bag in the empty plot, and then sometimes, you know, instead of picking it up, the dumpster would come, the truck would come, and they would just burn it. As we all know, this happens. So one day I followed her and I said, you know, please don't do this. And she said, you know, Saab kehte hain. So I said, okay. Then the next day I saw her child bringing it. Again, patterns, these are cycles, right? The Saab tells the ayah tells the child. So now the child is getting into this habit. And then I talked to the child and I said, beta yahan nahi, and Ammi ne kaha. So these are just cycles. And so then I followed them home one day and I spoke to the man and I said, can you please stop telling this poor child to drop the trash here? And he got very offended. Turned out it wasn't even him, it was some cousin or something. And then the next day, 3 men came to my house in a car to basically said, aap kaun hain? Hum jahan marzi phekenge, you know? So you asked, how do we do this, right? It starts in our daily habits, in our daily life, in the way we interact with people, in the way that we think that only, you know, our family's comfort matters, but the neighbor's comfort doesn't matter. It starts with not making the issue about pride and honor and ego, but about, you know, the right to breathe fresher air. Because air pollution is a form of violence, and what was happening next to me was violence. So. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Very interesting. And I see that you have all alluded to and talked about authors who may have thought about climate problems, may have thought about the environment, not directly but indirectly in their poetry or in their prose. But I think the matter has now become much more intense. It's become much more serious and much more at hand. And I think now it's the time where, rather than alluding to what can happen if there's a change, we should, you know, the writers should actually be writing about what's happening. And I think Tariq's work is very much in there, and I've known him all my life. So, I mean, this is the environmental change that has happened which has convinced him to write about it. So similarly, you know, the floods in Pakistan, they're stories from there as well. And when we talk about, and a lot of authors have been who pointed out, I think I remember one of the stories written by a friend who's no more, Asif Aslam, Samandar Ki Chori, and that was really something about environment that has happened. But one of the biggest champions, Arundhati Roy, has been writing and working, and you know, about. But I think it is time that the writers have to focus their narrative, their stories, which are built around environment and the climate change, rather than as a sort of a, you know, just a mention of it or feeling of it. But they will have to focus, because there's an urgency, there's a need.
Does everybody understand how serious it is for this country? But I just wanted to, so the amount of heating baked into the environment in Pakistan has guaranteed that all of the Himalayan glaciers will melt. There is no question that they will melt in the next 30 to 40 years. They will be gone, which means that there will be no Indus, no Indus tributaries, no Ganges, no Brahmaputra, no Pani. Literally no, and this is going to happen. This is not conjecture. Absolutely. That is how serious it is. And it boggles my mind that people walk around this country and think, you know, about the future without ever figuring this into their context. And this is going to happen. I don't know how these governments are going to deal with it.
Hello, thank you so much. It was lovely hearing all of you speak. So let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Zeest. I graduated from LUMS and I am a writer. So now everything that I've studied and every time I've encountered weather and environment and all the things that I've read, it's kind of, it becomes part of the emotion. For instance, if I refer to old writing, Sonnet 18, Shakespeare, summer is basically a character and you feel the emotion, but you kind of don't understand environment and weather as a separate character. And given the urgency of now to include that and to create an awareness within our writing, to reach to the core of the people who are reading and say, okay, yes, this weather is invoking emotion. Yes, winter may be depressing. Yes, summer may be light. Spring will be happy. But also it's important to understand that this is a fleeting moment and it will pass if you don't recognize its value. How do you as a writer do that? How do you as a writer differ from not just feeling the emotion of it, but also understanding that this itself is a separate character in the story, if nothing else? Does that make sense? Am I being clear? Thank you.
I guess...
crack your cheek, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I answer that? Just very short. I want to read something quickly. reflection is needed about this world we inhabit, about evolving balance created and disruptive discord generated. Imperative is introspection about nature's power, about its ability to correct and fragility of challenges by men. A veracity needs to be understood about perceptions seemingly absolute, about seeing the reality of light and the fact that it diffracts, refracts, and reflects, especially on us. So one addresses it one addresses it with as much emotion and intellect as one can. And is it received well? People don't like to read poetry very much. You know, a few of us will, not most of us won't. So does this become just a means of self-expression and consoling oneself that yes, we are worried? It is real, it's real. We have to be worried about our grandchildren, and I do not even want to consider our great-grandchildren. But how do we address this? So we do this with what we can. This is how I do it. It's awareness.
I mean, I'll just very quickly say, because I know there were a couple of other hands, is that, you know, it's what I started off by saying. For me, it's not a separate thing. It's not, nature isn't over there. It's, if I'm going to write, I write about, you know, everything that matters to me. So, which is all nature. I mean, it's nature. So I can't, there is no language with which to say how to write about something that is not separate from you, because it's not separate from you. This book, The Geometry of God, so I wrote this book very quickly several years ago. It's an older one of mine. It's about the discovery of the first fossil, the first whale fossil, which was called Pakicetus. It was found in the Salt Range Mountains. I fictionalized this discovery. It wasn't discovered by a woman. It was discovered by a man, a group of paleontologists who were Pakistani and American. And in my book, I made a little child, Amal, she's 6 years old, she accidentally discovers it. So that's where the book begins. It begins with her being taken into the Salt Range Mountains by her grandfather, by her Nana, and they're looking at rocks and they're picking them up, and he's describing to her, you know, what fossils are. And so there's this whole world of knowledge and connection that builds, and that's where the story is going to come from. So the language is not separate from the you know, how this child grows up. I was going to read, but there's no time, so I'm not going to read you that section, but I'll just very quickly say that Amal is not allowed by her family to go into the mountains and actually make these discoveries as she grows older, because she's a woman. She then starts to stay indoors, and she works in a lab where she cleans the fossils and she does the documenting of the fossils, which is obviously very important work, but it's more invisible work than the people going out into the field and making the big discoveries. So toward the end of a book, of this book, she actually does go, and she gets to touch, and there's this line where she says at the end, these chocolate sunset shades of mudstone and siltstone taught me that beauty in the abstract will never be enough for me. I have to taste. So there's just this need to touch for yourself, to taste for yourself, to look for yourself, and with that, then the language will reflect that there is no separation for you.
Hello.
I think we have a question.
I have a question and a comment. It's wonderful listening to you guys. These words, very inspiring. However, the comment, I remember there used to be a little plaque on in my grandfather's room which said, to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and below that it is the law of God. Now I would say this is Newton's third law of motion, but he says this is what humanity is all about. How you walk this earth determines the footprint that you're going to leave. Mm-hmm. Now, we all talk a lot, but how much are we ourselves doing? It's impacting us all. You know, we go to a shop and I refuse to take a plastic bag, and the guy says, शॉपर चाहिए, मैं उससे कहता हूँ शॉपर तो मैं खुद हूँ, तो मुझे तुम शॉपर क्या दोगे? The thing is, each one of us is contributing to the waste, is contributing to the erosion of the environment, and we need to ourselves see कि हमारा अपना footprint क्या है. हम लोग मतलब रोड पे कराची की ट्रैफिक देख लें अगर आप, तो the way we are, nobody goes in a straight line. They are all, you know, we are zigzagging. Everyone, I mean, all of us, it's become a character, and we waste fuel in that. I think so much fuel can be conserved or saved if we all go in a straight line. Time can be also saved.
So there's one thing that every single person in this room can do that will help the environment as opposed to destroy it. Stop eating meat. Stop it. No, I'm serious.
Yes.
30% of methane emissions globally come from cattle and sheep. 30%. That's a huge number. Stop eating meat. It's really simple.
The biomass of cattle is more than the biomass of all other mammals.
Yeah, I mean, farming is the greatest polluter. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I was just going to say, but you know, the difference I think today from say 19th century representations of the natural world is that the 19th century representations, even the early 20th century, are more metaphorical in the way they're presented. So if you think about A Passage to India, which I'm assuming everybody in this room has read, right? That the description of the caves is really mundane and boring and not exotic, and specifically not exotic, so that the thing that Adela, what was her Quested, does, I mean, she imagines this fantastic rape scenario that happens in the cave, which never really happened, and she can only do that because Foster has actually has in fact deadened the caves. But at the end of the novel, nature comes alive, right? So when Aziz and Fielding, you know, try to be friends, the rocks didn't want it, right? The animals didn't want it, the rocks didn't want it, the terrain didn't want it, the land didn't want it. It said, no, not then, no, not yet, no, not there, right? So in a sense, the metaphor he's using of nature is very much to define relationships, not to actually talk about nature itself. I think the language today, which is why I was asking the question about the metaphoric, how you think of it, I think is much more literal in the way that the narratives use climate today and weather today. And I think that has been the big shift. And so you can't simply read it as a metaphorical reflection of Lear's madness because he's out in the heath and there's a storm going on, right?
And if I could just add to that, weather, climate, environment were knowable till the longest time. We knew them, they followed a pattern, we knew how to control nature. We're past that point now. We're living in the age of what Amitav Ghosh calls the uncanny climate change. 1 minute it's hot, then it starts snowing. Look at America right now. There's LA wildfires, there's extreme blizzards happening, there's rain happening. The weather no longer follows the rules that we have set out or the ways that we understand it. We also need to be humble in realizing we can't know or master or tame nature anymore. We need to unlearn. So on a very philosophical term, when we keep talking about we're going to give nature meaning, nature already has meaning. Yeah. It's a sense of humility where we need to decenter ourselves, sit amongst the environment, and realize you're a part of it, you're not apart from it. And the scary part is it's finite. So if you look at any kind of indigenous wisdom that comes from Native American people or any other kind of indigenous people, they learn from nature, they read nature, they don't impose meaning on it. And that's why they've survived, and which is why, sadly, we as urban dwellers are perishing faster. So I would just like to add that.
Am I? Am I vegetarian? I am a vegetarian. Yes, really, I actually am. I haven't eaten red meat. I haven't eaten red meat in 30 years.
There's been a hand up, and I think we should let the person who wants to ask. Just ask your question.
Yeah, I haven't eaten beef or mutton or any of that for a long time. Yeah. Oh, we have to exit?
No, but she's. Yes.
Yeah.
Nature a lot. You're right, it is very, very hard to navigate solitude with nature and do research. So I was wondering how does one navigate that, especially in Pakistan where you can't be alone in nature. as a woman.
Question.
So really wanted to ask that. Thank you so much.
I mean, that's very much what Geometry of God is about. It is, like I said, it's about this girl who finds this fossil, and then she grows up to become Pakistan's first woman paleontologist. But her sister is unwell, and then it becomes her responsibility to look after the sister instead of developing her passion for land and for science. So when I was doing research for this book, first of all, the discovery of that first whale fossil in Pakistan was made, like I said, by a man who was from the United States. So I contacted him, and he very kindly and generously sent me all his research. It wasn't published yet, and he just shared it. So I studied that. Then I also went to the Natural History Museum in Islamabad, I think it was Islamabad or Pindi, and I spoke to the first woman paleontologist in Pakistan. We have a woman paleontologist, and I interviewed her. And so this character ended up being a little bit inspired by her, and her stories of how she eventually got permission to go out into these hills and camp and pitch her tent and do all these discoveries with the men. She was the only woman. But it takes a lot of perseverance, and there's a lot of discouragement because you're constantly having to push against family and other pressures to say that, the same excuse of security issues which governments use to barricade land and keep people outside and control bodies is used, within families and homes as well. Security issue, don't go out. So you just have to keep pushing, and the research is there, but I think for some people it just takes longer to acquire if you don't have connections and if you're just doing it yourself. But don't give up.
Thank you all so much for attending this session.
Thank you very much for coming.
Panelists for conducting this session.